Welcome to the Radiate Wellness Podcast with your host, metaphysician, Reiki master, and hypnotherapist, Christy Clemens Hoffman. Each week, we will discover teachings, tips, and tools to radiate your best life ever with practitioners, authors, and luminaries to help you on your path. Wellness, joy, peace, abundance. What do you want to radiate?
Hello and welcome back to the Radiate Wellness Podcast, where today we radiate home with the poet laureate of Kansas City, Melissa Ferrer Civil, also known as Missy T. Ferrari. And Melissa is a poet, performer, organizer, and educator that is based now in the Kansas City area. Welcome. Thank you so much for joining me today.
Thank you. I'm so happy to be on here. Yeah.
This is so great. Well, we met actually at Poetic Underground, but I didn't really put it together. Somebody said you should get in touch with Melissa, and I did. And then I realized, wait a minute, I know you from Poetic Underground.
Yeah.
You perform there.
Yeah.
That was really cool. I am only recently calling myself a poet. You've been doing this all your life, haven't you?
Yes, I have. I've been doing it since I was 12. So yeah.
12. Wow. Well, it's funny because the first time I wanted to do a public poetry reading was in May, and I showed up at this open mic for Poetic Underground, just so excited to be doing that, put my name down on the list. I said, this is my first time. I'm so excited. And they said, you realize this is a slam, right? And I said, I don't even know what that is.
Oh, no. That is always my favorite story, when someone shows up to just do a poem and they end up entering a slam.
I had no idea it was a contest.
Did you end up going through with it?
I did. Oh, absolutely. They explained what it was and what the rules were, what the process was. And they said, do you still want to do this? I said, okay, yeah, sure. Why not? You kind of gird your loins to perform. I made it to the second round. I was thrilled.
That's amazing. That's so great.
And they called everybody to the stage beforehand to go over the order and everything. They said, poets to the stage, poets to the stage. Christy, get up here.
That's so funny.
Yeah. So somewhere over the summer, I was like, yeah, I'm a poet.
That's beautiful.
But you've been doing this since you were 12. That is amazing. But you're not from around here, are you?
Nope. I'm originally from Brooklyn, New York, was raised in different parts of Florida, and have lived here about going on 7 years now.
7 years. That's longer than I thought. And you had a pretty circuitous route. So you were born in Brooklyn, grew up there for a part of your life, went to Florida, and then eventually you wound up in Kansas City. That in itself is a fascinating and really, I want to say heartbreaking story, but it wasn't. It was serendipitous.
Yeah, definitely.
What happened?
I was just having a conversation with a friend of mine last night about, even if you know everything is going to end up okay in the end, you can still grieve. It is still heartbreaking. So it is both heartbreaking and serendipitous. When I was 22, I'm trying to decide how far back to go, because nothing exists in a silo in our lives, and there's always events that lead to other events. But it's important to note that when I was 22, I had my first psychotic break, and I was senior in college, and that was really destabilizing time. It took me a year and a half to finish a semester of college, because I had to keep dropping out because I had been emptied of myself and the world was collapsing around me in different ways. But I did eventually finish, got a 9-to-5 job. My sister got me a job in customer service. And I've always been someone who's followed her heart. And it just didn't feel like I was supposed to stay at that job. And I'm as I think back at it now, I always think of those times as being emptied of myself. But something in me knew that even that wasn't okay. And mind you, I was on the going between mania and some form of stasis and all of these things like that. And I was really obsessed with finding God's will for my life, doing God's will for my life, finding my great big purpose. And I was seeking it anywhere I could. And one of those seekings led me to deeply listening to Lauryn Hill, who I absolutely love to this day. Will always love Lauryn Hill. In that process, I found out Lauryn Hill was going to do a concert in Austin. I quit my job, bought a ticket to Austin, because I was I'm going to meet Lauryn Hill. She's got the answers, right? Once again, trying to find this big, great purpose for my life. In searching for this and trying to go to Austin, I end up missing my flight. I end up only being able to book the first leg of my flight, which was to Atlanta, but not being able to make it to Austin. I was like, I'm committed. And I've always been this kind of person that's like, I'm committed to the bit. Once my set out on the journey, I am on the journey. I made it to Atlanta and then stayed with a friend for a while, was kind of just puttering around Atlanta. Also did not have a lot of money at this time. I ended up hitchhiking back to Tallahassee. I wasn't living in Tallahassee at the time, but that was the city of my alma mater. Ended up going on a meeting an artist. This is like a winding story, mind you, but I'm trying to like very condensed because I think it's all connected, right? Ended up meeting an artist who was like, what are you doing? I'm trying to find God's purpose for my life. And she was like, cool, I'm going to Savannah, Georgia. I want to go to Savannah, Georgia. And I was like, cool, I'll go to Savannah, Georgia. I'm not doing anything else. And so I go to Savannah, Georgia with this artist on tour. She's like, I can take you to Savannah and that's about it. You're going to have to figure your stuff out from Savannah. It's like, cool, I'll figure my stuff out from Savannah. And then I remember that there was this religious intentional community that I had met at the top of the year, literally January 1st, that I had wanted to check out that's in Savannah, Georgia. And I was like, I think I'll go check them out. And so I go to this. So I performed with this artist at this house show for why she was in Savannah. Then the next morning, I go check out this religious intentional community and I end up staying there for months. And for the first few months, I was just like checking out their vibe. Is this like of the lifestyle I'm looking for? Is this God's great big purpose for my life? And then I realized at a certain point inside of myself, I was like, I don't think I'm supposed to be baptized in this community, but I'm also, and this is important, I'm also stuck. I have no money. I'm not a real hitchhiker. I may hop online and be like, who's heading north, south, west, or east, but I'm not a step out on the side of the road and stick out a thumb hitchhiker. And I was stuck. I had no place to go. I was terrified. And then one of the members, you're like, you're not going anywhere. Just join us. You're not going anywhere. Just join us. So I ended up joining. The moment I went in the water, came out of the water, knew I had made a huge mistake. And I was silent for 3 hours. Ended up staying with them for about, I think it was about 4 or 5 more months before I had my second psychotic break. The thing I need you to understand about these psychotic breaks, I'm so sorry that this is such a long and winding tale, but it really is all connected. But the thing I need you to understand about these psychotic breaks is they're always about either searching for some deep truth or honoring my own truth and like listening to myself. And when I either get too obsessed with searching for some deep truth as if the truth isn't already in me, or am not listening or neglecting the truth that's in me, my body implodes, my psyche, my soul implodes and rages and then tears down my whole house, tears down the reality that I know, right? So I ended up having to leave there. That's how I got out of the cult the first time. Yeah. To fast forward.
Hey, let me just stick a pin in that because you mentioned the word that I was wondering, cult.
Yes, it was a cult. It took a very long time for me to call it a cult because we're always looking for home. We're always looking for people who resonate our own understandings of how the world works. And the reason I call that place a cult is because I have learned the difference between a cult and a culture that strips one of their agency and does not empower one to know thyself. Culture, which comes, yourself comes bubbling up in the midst of. Those are two different things. Basically, fast forward, went back home, then set back out again and went to Indianapolis because I was this time looking for healing. Ended up at a woman's house who like had this farm that for me to work, and that wasn't actually the situation. Had to get out of that place. Took the hippie virtual train via some Facebook groups to a music festival out in Ohio, met some hippie friends, lived with them in a van for a little bit, lived in the woods for a while, and then had another break on one night on the Mississippi River, and then went back to the cult for a few weeks because I was like, I need God. Where is God? And I was like, these people, the last people I remember who fully dedicated their lives to God was this cult. And that cult was in Warsaw, Missouri. And then I actually hitchhiked out of that cult, right? I was like, oh, there's a reason I left the first time. I need to leave. And actually what's really interesting is I was reading a book. I had a book with me by Caroline Myss, and I can't remember which one. It wasn't Entering the Kingdom. There's another one, but it was recounting the story of an encounter with a homeless person. And something about that story, I can't even remember what, gave me the little nugget I needed to have the courage to just walk out the door, because I knew I wasn't supposed to be there. And so I walked out the door, walked down the road, got picked up by this woman who had recognized me from the coffee shop, one of the coffee shops the cult ran and thus I worked in. And she was like, come with my family, come with me and my family. I like rejected for a while, but then ended up going because she's like, where are you going? And then I was there for about a week before my symptoms came back. Because mind you, I'm in full psychosis, which means hallucinations, voices flying through the air, like inside of me being like penetrated by these voices and energies. And so I tell her, oh, and then the symptoms start coming back while I'm at the house, right? Because there's a moment when I was hitchhiking, when I was walking down the road, that I kind of broke through the barrier of the voices and they all silenced. And it was soon after that she picked me up. And after about a week staying at her house, they came back. And I spent a day wandering up and down this dirt road, kind of like trying to find God in myself, trying to figure out like this. And it was this really big God question. It was just like, where are you? Where am I? Who am I? Who are you? And the thing that I can boil this all down to is I was in such a state of exile, right? I was in such a state of both self-alienation, alienation from my community, alienation from nature, alienation from any understanding I had of anything. I was in utter desolation, utter exile, walking up and down this dirt road, feeling like I was about to be wiped out of existence. And I eventually surpassed the road, made it to another road, and upon that road, I saw a church. Mind you, my thing, it's like the only thing I can do is my body is a beacon of suffering, crying out for God in this process. And I go to the church and I'm like kind of in a state of like non-speaking. And the pastor ends up calling a cop. The cop ends up calling an ambulance. The ambulance takes me to a hospital. And then that hospital took me via ambulance to research psych here in Kansas City, Missouri. And that is precisely how I landed. First, I wouldn't even say touch soil, because I say the day that I touched soil in Kansas City was December 1st, 2017, because I probably got here in probably truly either the end of October, beginning of November, around that time. But I didn't even touch soil because I was brought in by a stretcher to a hospital and was in that hospital for that entire duration. And in that hospital, I recognized so many things. And this is the last bit I'll tell you. It was my real come to Jesus moment, if you will. I recognized that I was running. I was like trying to find some great big will and purpose for my life. And I realized in that moment, these are like those revelatory moments that is spoken of in all of these. Everyone has these once they're seeking for the truth. It was a great revelation that I was searching for God's great purpose, God's great will for my life, but God's simple will for my life was that I was alive in the first place. And I was shirking off my responsibilities, and I wasn't allowing myself to accept my life and deal with the accountability and responsibility I had in my own life. And then the other two things, and I'm done, I promise. The other two things was I recognized that I could not escape this world. I couldn't join a cult. I couldn't live in the woods, that I had to be here now, that I had to be in the midst of everything, being in the world, but not of the world. And then the third thing was that I had to be accountable for what was going on in me. And to me, accountable means the ability to account for what's happening in your life, and responsible being the ability to respond to what's happening in your life, accounting and responding. And so I realized suddenly in that moment, I had no idea what was happening in my life. I could account. I'm hearing voices. There are energies entering and exiting my body. I don't know what's happening. I can't form a full thought, like these kinds of things. And then I had to say, and I don't know who you are, God. I actually no longer know who you are. I've been chasing you and I have no idea who you are. But the one thing I believe, there's a Bible quote verse, Jeremiah 29:11, which is like, I know the plans I have for you, not plans to harm you, plans to give you a hope and a future. And suddenly I was like, whatever this is, I suddenly know it's not you, because I feel no hope, I feel no future, and I only feel harm. So whatever you are, I trust that you are at least this one thing that I've read. And in that, I'm giving you everything, because I know not what to do with anything. And then after that, a social worker asked me if I would go on a bus back to Florida or stay in Kansas City. And I knew if I went back to Florida, I'd have a mediocre family who would kind of take care of me, who would mediocrely take care of me. I'm not trying to call them mediocre people, but they would mediocrely take care of me.
Because they weren't equipped.
Exactly. They weren't equipped. And I would have a diagnosis, which would mean I would have excuses to not succeed. But if I stayed in Kansas City at a homeless shelter, I'd have nothing outside of myself, also nothing within myself, and I could only walk with God at that point. So I decided to stay in Kansas City, stayed at a homeless shelter called Restart, and got my restart here in Kansas City.
I have questions. First of all, you felt strongly called by finding your purpose with God and your meaning for God. Where did you get that notion? Where did you learn about God? I don't want to take too much of your time, but I would like to ask you a few simple favors. First of all, please rate, review, and share this podcast wherever you're listening. You know, it sounds like a simple little thing, and it is, but it has a huge impact for us because it helps other people find us in the podcasting algorithms. I don't know how it works, but I do know that it helps a lot. Next, if you would subscribe or follow wherever you're listening, whether that's YouTube or Apple Podcasts, Amazon Music, Pandora, Spotify, wherever you're listening, just hit subscribe or follow, and that helps you and it helps us. It helps you because then you receive notifications when we have a new episode that's out. It helps us because, again, algorithm magic, I don't know what happens, but it helps. And then finally, you can support our podcast in a tangible way by going to radiatewellnesscommunity.com/podcast and then click on support the show. Now, we have a new feature too. We are now on Patreon. You can find us on Patreon. You can also find the link to Patreon when you go to radiatewellnesscommunity.com/podcast. So on Patreon, for $3 a month or $5 a month, you can support your metaphysical and spiritual growth. You can learn about upcoming guests, and you can get early and ad-free versions of the shows. So please support us. This podcast is free for you to listen, but we have costs, and quite frankly, they come out of my pocket. So if you like this content, if you get a lot out of it, please see what you can do to give back. Thank you so much.
Oh, that's a really good question. I always say my whole life I believed in God. I remember as a kid looking at people who would do certain things and I'd be like, you're so lucky, because I'm like, you don't believe in God and that's why you can do what you're doing.
Oh, wow. There's a lot to unpack there.
But I will say, I do remember being distinctly 8 years old in New York. We used to go to this very ecstatic Christian, I don't know what denomination, but it was a Haitian church. And it was a lot. Like, people were catching the Holy Ghost, speaking in tongues, falling on the floor, running around the church. And I remember I periodically begged my mom, like, to not take me, to let me not go to church. And eventually she gave in. And one Sunday she's like, you don't have to come anymore. And ever since then, it was like, oh, I love God. I love people. And that's my understanding of what faith is. And I moved like that all the way into college until my first psychotic break, where I had to come to terms with a lot of the difference between what the supremacist institution of religion called Christianity and the real Christ.
Wow. So that was my first question. Yes, absolutely. Brought up in a faith-based community, always resonated with you. I also know that you came from significant tragedy.
Yeah, I have all of this lore for myself. I've created my own lore based off of my things. One of the things is, like, for 10 years of my life, every 2 years, someone died. It started when I was 12, and I will say ended when I was 22. So from 12, I lost the first person that was closest to me, my favorite person in the world, my sister, my godmother, my sister Sophia, to suicide. Alleged suicide. There's a whole thing there, but that's not what this is for. So alleged suicide. Then when I was 14, I lost my mother, who was my second favorite person in the world, to pneumonia. Then 16, I lost my estranged father to diabetes. And then when I was 8, I lost my uncle to the earthquakes in Haiti. And then when I was 20, I lost an aunt. And then when I was 22, I lost myself. Yeah. And so I would say I'm very well acquainted with death. Actually, most days I call death a good friend. Yeah. It could be because I'm a Scorpio, a poet, or...
Yeah. Love how you list yourself, significant list of loss. That is important. And that hurts just as bad as losing a treasured person.
Yeah, especially because I think I want to stress actually a little bit. When I say I lost myself, I don't mean to like qualify or quantify how other people mean when they say they lost themselves. All I can say is when I say I lost myself, that means one, I lost all connection to my past. Literally had no context for being in existence. I lost all connection to the people around me. Couldn't feel love in my life. Couldn't feel love in my heart. Literally the people who I once loved so deeply were all strangers to me, all alienated from me. Like literally every connection that I had, every inner sense of direction, my heart that would pump, that would let me know which direction to go, my emotions that would let me know how I felt about things, my thoughts that would let me know what I thought about things, all of that gone.
Trusting yourself, which is a huge thing. I've gone through that myself where I just don't feel like I can trust myself. And that is a huge loss.
Yes.
And through it all, you managed to yes, you lost yourself, but you also regained something. And how did you find your way through this significant mental illness?
I will say that I am still finding my way. And I say that only because I walk with care. I walk soft with tenderness because I am not going to fool myself into believing I'm always fully well. I always feel well. I know that I am a well, and I know that like wellness becomes me. And at the same time, part of wellness is living side by side with illness in order to always know how to attend to it, especially while living in an ill world, because that is the real condition of my existence and truly all of our existence. But I will say the original question being, how did I find myself through this? When I could trust nothing, I chose to trust God. To be very real, I chose to trust in that Bible verse, Jeremiah 29:11, that whatever all of life was, because that moment when I said, God, I don't know who you are, I also knew that I was talking to all, the capital A, all, right? Everything, all that there is. And I said, I trust, though, that I could put my life in your hands because you actually do want the best for me. You actually do. And you know, not only do you want the best for me, you know what that is. Because you're right, I did not trust myself. To this day, I still have a hard time trusting myself sometimes. But I do ultimately trust God. So that brought me through the journey. Like, there were times when I first arrived in Kansas City, I'd be walking to the 10th Street Library, and I'd be walking and voices would be flying through the air, piercing me like arrows, truly piercing my insides like arrows. And they would ride the wings of guilt and shame, disappointment, all of the crestfallen nature of life, and would crash upon the shores of my soul. And I would continue walking because I had this trust in God above all else. And as I continued that journey, God has been with me every step of the way. I remember the moment that I was sitting in a coffee shop. I was in a master's program for urban education, which I became a teacher through all of this. Literally for that application saying, the greatest challenge I have faced and overcome is psychosis. And they still were like, we are choosing you to teach our children. And I was like, God, get this job. It's because you want me to have this job because I'm doing nothing but telling my truth. And that ended up being a stepping stone. But anyway, I remember sitting in a coffee shop, drinking coffee. And I remember in the center of my chest, a little faucet just turned on a little bit, and out started trickling emotion. I remember the distinct feeling and the moment I started to receive my emotions back. And I can't explain what happened except that it was God who literally returned the faucet of emotion on inside of me, but not like to the full blast that it used to be, but to like literally a little trickle. And that almost caused me to lose myself again because it was the first time I was feeling emotion in 5 years. And it was just a little trickle. And I was like freaking out, and I was trying to text people. So I was like texting my friends, trying to connect with someone so I could work through it. And God, which like amounts to all of the conditions of our existence. Anyway, at least that's how I see it. But no one answered the phone, or one person did. And they were like, just sit, it'll be okay. And so I just sat and I breathed and I felt this trickle of emotion. And that's when it felt like I had come alive again. And it was in a random coffee shop on a random day at a random hour. I remember the first time I felt gratitude again. And it was a strange moment. And this is the other thing, like the losing of these things and the refinding of these things is the moments that I realized they were never mine. They were never granted. They were never just mine to have. We take all of these things for granted. Like, of course I feel, of course this, of course nothing. It's all a miracle. It's all a miracle and a gift that we experience any of these things. I was in a passenger seat during a storm and we were driving and I saw a storm cloud and something in me broke. A storm in me broke and I felt the most gratitude I'd ever felt in my life. And that was the first time I felt gratitude in years. It was these little moments in which I was re-gifted aspects of myself as I was just grudging on. In the like material nature of life, I was battling with being in school again and still having a brain that didn't think like it used to. I was trying to learn to teach kids. I was making new friends. I was performing on stages. I was doing all these things, all with the faith that I would find my way. We say fake it till you make it in the world. I say faith it till you make it. Faith it until it comes to be.
You got to believe.
Yeah.
You don't believe, it's not going to happen. I don't care what you do.
Exactly.
Not gonna happen. Yeah, it's not gonna happen. So what a circuitous journey to get here, but not, because people who work in words, poets, the writers, the creative people who put their human experience into words, I mean, everything is going to come out in art, isn't it? Everything is going to make its way to, like, that's how we express our world. And thank God for the poets to be able to express what we all are feeling but don't know how to put words to. Along the way, come here to Kansas City and you find yourself being the poet laureate, the first ever inaugural poet laureate of Kansas City. What the heck? That is crazy. I heard that at Poetic Underground. Please welcome to the stage our first ever Kansas City poet laureate, Ferrer Civil. And I was like, what? We got one of those? What happened? How'd that happen?
Oh, that's funny. So they put out the call, I think, last year. And I don't know, because it was a self-nomination process. And a lot of people started sending me the application. Have you seen this? I remember people that I organize with, friends of mine that are like also artists and poets and stuff like that were like, you should apply for this. And I was like, nah. There are so many poets in this city, right? One, people have been doing this longer than I have. People who've been doing it here longer than I have, and people who are more deeply connected to their community than I am. So I was like, there's so many that I want to give it. There's your Glenn Norths, your Natasha Ria Elscaris, your Jose Fauces, all of these people who are deeply entrenched, shared purpose hall, entrenched in their community, entrenched in their work, entrenched in poetry. And then there was one call I received, and it was like, we want you to apply for this. And I was like, well, I can't really deny this anymore. It was really a moment where I decided, yeah, if this specific person is telling me to apply, I have to. I literally can't not. And so I applied. And even though the specific person, the specific entity was like, we want you to apply, it wasn't a done deal. It'd be ideal kind of situation. So then in January, I'm at school, which is in Virginia, watching some of my friends perform at school, and I get a text and they're like, are you still interested in the poet laureate position? And I'm like, because they had called me first and I couldn't answer because I was in this reading. And they're like, are you still interested? And I'm like, yes. Because they're like, oh, we're getting everything ready for the poet laureate position. Are you still interested in it? And I'm like, yeah. And I just repeated the same thing 3 times, whatever. And I was like, wait, does that mean I'm getting it? I'm such a person that does not confirm, like, that doesn't believe that someone says it's confirmed until they say yes, kind of thing. And then they said yes. And mind you, I am at my friend's reading. I am like trying to be present in the space in Lynchburg, Virginia.
And support them.
Exactly. Be completely there to witness them. And at the same time, inside of me, it's like up and down moving. My spirit is trying to burst through the top of my head. And I'm trying to be there for my friends. And it was the perfect place to receive the news as well. Because what better place to receive the news that you are the first poet laureate of your city than amongst a bunch of poets and writers? What better place than amongst a bunch of people who knows exactly what that means?
Wow.
Yeah. And that was like a celebratory time. I got to like be celebrated very much during that residency. And then, I was inaugurated in February, which felt pivotal in a lot of ways. Being the first poet laureate, being Black woman poet laureate during Black History Month, all Black everything, like from a Black mayor, like it feels kind of optical. And the thing I know as an organizer, I'm always suspicious of any political move. But before I'm an organizer, I'm a child of God. Right? I'm a disciple. I'm a student of this life and all of the lives that exist within it, like a student of more than just the zeitgeist and the current political stuff. Because of that, ultimately, regardless of whatever motivations and any of this, it always is relegated to God's hands. In my life, I can say that fully. So yeah, that's how it came about.
That's crazy. And I should say that it was Mayor Quentin Lucas who had the final say, wasn't it?
Yes, Mayor Quentin Lucas had the final say.
Did you know him before?
I'm an organizer, which means I've had a lot of interactions with him, and it's usually fighting him. I'm usually being like, you're not doing something right. One time I led an action with another person who's a current councilman, by the way, but me and that person led an action and ran up on the mayor's office with a bunch of KC Tenants people. We were in KC Tenants at the time, to demand our voices be heard for this tenant bill, or, oh, what was it for? I can't even remember. There was an ordinance being written, and it was being written without us and without our input that we had been pushing for before the ordinance even came out. There are now codes to get to the mayor's office because of that action.
Yeah, probably not a bad idea.
Yeah, it's like Quentin Lucas in the realm of organizing and being antagonistic towards.
So I know the question on everybody's mind who's listening at this point. What is a poet laureate?
I think that is a beautiful question. I've done my work and research ever since getting this position. It basically means talking to different people, other poet laureates and stuff. I think I've settled upon this understanding. So the government will tell you a poet laureate is an ambassador of poetry in the arts for your region. So I'm the poet laureate of Kansas City. I'm an ambassador of poetry in the arts in our city, which means I promote the importance of poetry to children and adults and things like this. I attend events, I connect people, I am connected to people like artists and things like that. I fight the cause of the artist in some way, shape, or form. But I think in myself, while those things remain true, what is more foundational is kind of the thing that I've always been doing, which is I use poetry to provide solidarity. It's the reason I decided to be a poet when I was 12, and it's the reason I became poet laureate at 32. I use poetry. Solidarity means oneness. I use poetry as a tool to manifest or tend to or help us remember our oneness and our solidarity with each other. And poetry is just a tool in my tool belt because I'm also an organizer. I'm also an educator. I'm also a friend. I'm a community member. And all of these roles that I play in my life, somehow they all intertwine, they all interweave. And then I communicate that into my poetry. It gets disseminated into my poetry. And I think to be a poet laureate, to be crowned with laurels for your poetic brow, is to, at some point, recognize that poetry is walked onto the page by the life that you lead. And it walks off of the page into the lives of others to help influence their active decisions that they're making to turn this world into something that we can all live in.
100%. 100%. I used to teach writing at the college level. And like I said before, words are the way that we interpret our world. Words are the way that we express our world. And when people can put the human experience into words in a way that touches souls and just basically explains what we're doing here, that is a small thing.
Yeah.
Do you have a poem that you could read?
Yes.
I would love that.
I do. I told you, I do think it's important because you asked, what are we radiating today? And I said, radiating home. And the thing is, for me, the reason I said that, even though we did not talk very much about home in this, right? At all, actually. But that is the point. When you're home, you may step through the door and say, I'm home, but who said that for real? It's more a feeling, and it's more your goings and your doings and your interactions and the freedom to be fully in that space. And that's how you know you're home. Not because it's spoken, but because it's felt. That being said, I think what's funny is as I was saying all this, I was like, I'm actually switching poems.
That's totally fine.
To be transparent. But I was going to read a poem called Agape, which I really love. It means unconditional love. And I really love that poem. But I also have this poem called When I Say I Want to Go Home that paints a picture of the sense of home that I feel. And I think because I did say I'm radiating home, I literally go either way. So now you get to choose which poem I read.
Oh, that is a tough choice, honey. I'd say whichever one you think most expresses your journey.
Oh, then we're going to Agape. All right.
Are all about agape. We had coffee the other day, the secret here. When I come in, you're having a very heartfelt and it sounded like maybe difficult conversation with somebody and expressing just how much you love them. And the sense of agape love was palpable. I know you're like that with all of your friends that just genuinely love. You love with everything you are. To me, that's home.
And now you get to hear a poem about it. A little bit about this poem, just something very, very short. Each stanza starts with the phrase mouth ajar, because I love that the word agape also looks like agape, which makes me think of a very open mouth or open arms. But I chose mouth because I like mouths. I stare at people in the mouth when I'm talking to them instead of their eyes. And then it's also after Araceli's good, you are, how does it go? You are the ones I love, or you are who I love. It's written after reading that poem. So agape, after Araceli's good, my mouth ajar, innocence unbarred in bathroom stalls, scribbles for a good time call all, lonely cries for help and the support that follows, incendiary words from stitched lips whose guts boast a fiery yearning for flame and ash to take the place of worthless chattering chains. I love you. Mouth ajar, the person in ecstasy, grasping a body, maybe their own, maybe someone else's, learning what intimacy is for the first time and how it enters in more than just a hole as every pore opens and becomes receptacle for tawny, ephemeral pheromones and promises of life continuing forevermore. I love you. To the person who only knows flesh hitting flesh, a smacking slop, consumption, and discreet ripening of more pull away, I also love you. Mouth ajar, the holy choir, a chamber of stars and murmuring melodic whispers that travel light years into the hallowed halls of churches and schoolrooms in first grade, the children laughing as they watch an overzealous teacher conduct and scratch his head. In middle school, the voices cracking, octaves switching. In high school, the children with the ego that enters into the midst of the vocal cords, vibrating on sidewalks, sitting on crates with hat turned upward, guitar with broken string, heart with burgeoning dreams, in showers, in bedrooms, in closets, in cars, on screens, on stages, whispered into lovers' ears. I love you, mouth ajar. Masticating in fine dining facilities, gorging at the Thanksgiving table, becking at the crumbs from the hands of the old lady who cares for dirt-covered doves, masticating in the mess hall, in bomb-ridden terrains, in the cafeteria, while eyeing the boy or the girl 2 tables across from you, in the soup kitchen, in front of the hot dog carts in Manhattan, the food from the dumpster behind the Aldi, you know, the one that doesn't throw bleach on good food, after the wedding, after the funeral, after the birth, after you've thrown up the last meal, after you've left the hospital, after you've said goodbye, after the first awkward conversation, after and before, and to those who chew before and through, I love you. Mouth ajar, a whooping yell on the prairie, cowboy call, and riding into the sunset, the native and the drum becoming one on the tongue around a fire, the tribesmen with feet moving like flames upon the African dirt, the babe mouthing first words through drool and digit, the women in large hats at the front of the church, giving up the ghost and singing ancestral songs, the slaves in the fields, tuning to the tone of freedom, rising from the water surface, falling from the air, the medicine woman, the medicine man in deep trance and channel, the Messiah on Golgotha, Eli, Eli, lama sabachthani, or, and forgive them, Father, for they know not what they do, the centurion declaring he could see, the man on his knees, will you? The woman teary-eyed, yes. The many mouths yelling Maria or Stella into the night sky. The woman yelling as she breaches. The man yelling at his son. The son yelling at himself in the mirror. The daughter yelling into her frame. The homeless man and woman yelling on the street corner. The birds caw after prey. The crowd, any crowd, with any ululation or outcry, with any assertion necessary enough to open the throat and emote, I love you, mouth ajar. Wim Hof, an ice bath. My friends, an ice bath. The monk who knows clarity. The wrestler, the runner, the weightlifter, the yogi, the baller, the leaves, the stems, the roots, even the flowers, the soon-to-be mother on the hospital bed, the grass, the mother sitting next to the hospital bed, holding her daughter's hand, the mother in the kitchen, over the sink, over the stove, the baby at her feet, the girl losing her virginity, the baby who breached, the creatures of the land in their way, of the air in their way, of the sea in their way, the man whose hammer missed, my roommate in his room in the morning, my sister before she jumped and right before her body hit the ground, everyone who jumped and right before their bodies hit the ground, the ones who dove into waters certain and uncertain, the ones in hospital beds as they close their eyes for the final time, God giving life to Adam, both parts of them. Adam, both parts of them. I love you.
Thank you. That's beautiful.
Thank you.
Wow. So your website,
yes,
Melissa Ferrer. How do I pronounce that? Ferrer and?
Yes, that's Melissa Ferrer and.
Melissa Ferrer and.
Yeah.
.com. And you've got links to your blog, which is just awesome. And all of your publications. You've got several books of poetry, as well as poems published throughout the world in various locations. And that is in the show notes as well. Thank you so much for joining me today. Their first ever Kansas City Poet Laureate. This has been, it's just great to know you. And I really enjoy you a lot. So thank you for joining me today.
Thank you. It was a pleasure. And thank you for doing this, honestly. Radiating wellness is very important.
And we will take every opportunity to do that. Thanks again. Don't know what to watch next? Decisions. Well, we've got some suggestions. You can click this little video here and watch that. It's something that we think you're going to like. If you like the last one, you're going to like that one too. You can also click on the subscribe button. And if you do that, then you'll get notifications whenever we have a new video up. Win-win, right?